Hello and welcome to the Brand Burger podcast. I'm your host, Braden Matson. In this show, we go deep with founders and marketers to give you business and marketing insights that drive commercial outcomes. If you enjoy this show or this episode, please do rate it and share it. That helps out a ton. Message me on LinkedIn as well if you would like to be a guest. Without further ado, super pumped to get into today's episode. Thank you very much for listening. Let's go. Today, we are talking about CAC, not birthday CAC. Of course, cost to acquire a customer is one of the most important metrics that any business should be looking at. If they're not looking at it, they should be. And if they are, they're going to be caring a lot about it. In this episode, I want to address what do you do if CAC starts to go up? So I'm going to review, of course, just right off the top, very simply, what CAC is a function of. We all know that. And then really get into how to actually start by diagnosing the problem and then what to do to start reversing this trend. So to kick us off, right, it's important to remind ourselves that CAC is like many other metrics that marketing looks at, ultimately an efficiency metric, right? Because you're taking your total marketing spend, usually, and dividing that by new customers. And you can do this in D2C, B2B, B2C, doesn't matter, right? Now, of course, the numbers are going to be vastly different in those business units, but the point is you can do this regardless of the company that you work for or own, etc. So CAC, ultimately, it's important to understand, is an efficiency metric because it is telling you a cost per something, right? Just like any other efficiency metric you're looking at. That doesn't mean that it is bad by any stretch. Efficiency metrics are really important. But the biggest thing that I want to call out here is to just start us off with that point. And so, of course, to calculate CAC, there's different ways that you can calculate CAC. You can take your total marketing spend, including overhead, like your fixed or variable costs, right? Things like salaries. So you could take your total marketing department divided by new customers or just advertising spend. And that's where you're going to get a delineation between, marketing CAC, advertising CAC, total CAC, blended CAC. But the point is the formula is extremely simple and it just stays the same, right? You're taking your total spend, whatever department or however you're categorizing that, and dividing that by your new customer acquisition. So the first place to start here, which I think is really important, is that not always, but often, right? In many cases, when we see a decline in the performance of an efficiency metric, what's happening is also a decline in overall effectiveness. So this is not always the case. For example, in a lot of cases, a low ROAS actually corresponds to a high effectiveness, and that's an entire other episode in itself, but there's a lot to do there with incrementality and in-market buyer capitalization and things like that. But the point is that in a lot of cases, and in particular as it relates to CAC, when you start seeing that going up, it's often the result of at least one, but usually a couple effectiveness variables that are hurting you. And that's really what we're going to talk about from a diagnosis perspective, so you can actually start to solve this issue. Just as a level set as well, and a reminder, effectiveness is doing the right thing. For example, reaching your target buyer and creating a memory. Efficiency is doing that thing faster or cheaper. So efficiency has to come first, because you have to do the right thing before you can do that right thing efficiently, right? Just like I could get into my car and I could go the wrong place really, really fast, but I went to the wrong place. So the place that I want to start here is just grounding us in that, right? If you start seeing CAC going up, it's probably because you're being ineffective somewhere, and that's going to start the diagnosis process. So if we start off with the first side of the CAC calculation, which is your spend, there's often a lot of effectiveness problems hiding in here. So the way that I would approach this if I was working inside of a company or consulting for you is I would start by looking at where your advertising and communications spend ultimately is going and trying to uncover where there may be effectiveness problems there. So, for example, let's start with just digital ad spend example. Let's say you are on LinkedIn and you're on Google. I would want to do an audit of where you are spending on those channels to understand things like, are you wasting money on the audience network on LinkedIn? Are you spending hundreds of thousands on the search partner network on Google, which I've personally seen many times? Are you optimizing for a conversion that is broken? Are you spending hundreds of thousands a month or quarter on ebook downloads that don't go anywhere, that are ultimately from spam bots, for example? One piece here to slot in, and this is also another episode in itself, but marketers don't talk about this nearly enough, I think, because a lot of them are not aware, and I was not aware how big of a problem this is in the industry, but ad fraud is a massively significant problem. In fact, ad fraud, I can't quote you the exact number, is $1 billion industry. And a lot of your digital spend is actually not even reaching real human beings. This is really important to understand, especially if you are working with some digital agency that doesn't give you the keys to the accounts and they're just running a lot of like traffic or awareness digital campaigns. There's a huge implication there, which is that a lot of your spend is almost certainly going to non-human beings. Right? That's a huge problem, and I actually think that is one of the reasons why we see lower advertising effectiveness over the last couple decade with respect to the increase in digital spend. I don't think it's because digital is just a bad platform or because in some cases we're spending too much on in-market buyers, but I actually think this ad fraud issue is really important. If you don't already, go follow Augustine Fu on LinkedIn. He has an analytics tool called Fu Analytics that will actually leverage HTTP files, as far as I understand. So essentially looking at server files, which you cannot fake. I've done this before, like going into the actual back end of your server and looking at the log files to actually see where those hits are coming from, because Google Analytics is just not going to give you that level of granularity. So the point is, if you're not looking at an ad fraud tool, I would also use that as part of your diagnosis, because you want to understand, as part of this overall audit of your digital spend, are you reaching human beings? In a lot of cases, unfortunately, you're actually not. So that's a really important place to start. So again, just to kind of put a bow on this first digital audit section, go through everywhere you're spending money on digital platforms, and you need to be able to evaluate that platform based on whether you're reaching human beings or not, whether that's Fu Analytics or another tool, or just manually doing this by going into your server logs. You have to understand if you're reaching human beings with your digital spend or not, because this is such a huge problem. And in a lot of cases, especially when you start with just kind of like direct response stuff, if you're new to market or new to an audience, you optimize for conversions, you start gathering new customers, but as CAC starts to increase, because you're mostly targeting customers who are in market, which we're going to talk about, what happens is platforms, in order to keep getting you conversions, will often start to just reach more and more non-human beings, because as the human beings in market stop converting because they've already converted, platforms need to keep spending your money because they need to keep making money. And so this can be a really significant problem. So again, go through all of your platforms to first understand, with the places that we're spending money on these platforms, are we actually reaching human beings or not? Really crucial. The other piece there is just the technical in the weeds side of the platforms, right? So you need to understand where you're spending money, whether it's Meta, Reddit, LinkedIn, Google, and someone who understands how these platforms work, and a skilled practitioner is going to be able to lift the hood and understand if you need an oil change, or where, if your spark plugs are not working properly. It's a car analogy, but you get the point. You need to understand if you're wasting money, like I said, on search partners or audience network. You need to understand where your digital spend is going. And even before we can start talking about the return on that spend, we need to understand if you're even reaching human beings. And the reality is, with Facebook's audience network, with LinkedIn's audience network, and with Google search partners and display network and other so-called ABM platforms that, I mean, I'm not going to name them, but my gosh, I have seen just the worst things. You really need to go through your platforms to understand if you're reaching human beings or not. That's step one of this process, is to just audit your digital spend for all of those things. The second approach, or second part of the approach to this diagnosis phase, is, again, we're still looking at the spend side of it. And this is also now going to partially overlap with the new customer side of it, because really what we're going to be looking at here is your targeting. And then we're also going to, at the same time, there's an interplay here, a really important one, between targeting and positioning. So just like as you go through your platforms to audit your spend, you also want to audit who you're targeting and how you are positioned. Because what can happen is that as you continue to acquire new customers and often to unlock a next phase of growth, you need to actually change your targeting and your positioning. So this is also an episode in and of itself, but really I'm going to call out some of the biggest things here. The first one is to make sure that you have consistent targeting across channels. Now, in some cases, you're really going to be targeting with creative or targeting with a category entry point. For example, if you're in D2C and your market really is everyone and it's really hard to actually target your specific buyer, maybe you're going to be mostly taking a targeting with creative approach. But the point is, you want to be looking at, like, if you're running on LinkedIn and you're running on Reddit, you want to actually understand, are we targeting, or at least trying to target, the same buyers and the same people? So if you're in B2B, if that is an account list, is that the same or as close as it possibly can be on LinkedIn as it is on Reddit, as it is on Meta, as it is on Google? Even on Google, you can use a tool like Primer to sync target account lists with Google, which is pretty hard to do. But the point here really is understanding who are we targeting, and are we actually, not only are we reaching human beings on these channels, but are we even targeting the right people, which again directly corresponds to positioning. So there's an interplay here between targeting and positioning that's really, really crucial, which is your targeting informs your positioning and your positioning informs your targeting. So there's a dynamic, symbiotic relationship and interplay between these two, because who you target is going to partially depend on how you're positioned to that target, and how you're positioned is going to depend on who you're targeting. So there's an influence of both of them. And so as CAC starts to go up, this isn't just usually it's not just a one variable solve. Sometimes it is, because you're just running on audience network and LinkedIn is just like wasting your money. But in a lot of cases, it's a collection of these variables. And this is why diagnosis is so important. So there's a strategic conversation that you should be having here if your CAC is increasing. And outside of just the platform stuff that we've already talked about, this targeting and positioning and overall strategy review, I actually think, is a really important part of this, right? Because what can be the case, not always, right? But in some cases, the reason CAC is going up is because you're maxing out on the number of new customers that you can acquire based on your current targeting. This is usually happens in the context of a performance plateau with companies who are definitely not early stage, unless you're super, super niche and you're positioned to like a tiny fraction of the market. Usually, if this is the reason that it's happening, it's because you're a bit of a larger company, not enterprise yet, but definitely higher than 20 or 30 million ARR. So if you're lower than that and you're finding CAC is increasing, it's probably to do with one of the effectiveness problems that we've already mentioned, or this next problem that I'm going to get into right now. This one is very, very common, which is that if we're thinking about return on investment and efficiency, here's what often happens, and it's very counterintuitive, but I've seen it firsthand, right? What often happens is, as we want to increase efficiency, what we do is we cut spend, because the best way to increase ROI is to just slice the denominator, right? It's to just slice what we're spending. But often what happens is when we cut where we're spending, we're less effective, because we were spending on effective things, Not always, but often. And so as ROI goes up, what can actually happen is that because your effectiveness goes down, and I'm going to give you a specific example in a second, as your effectiveness goes down, your CAC starts to actually go up. So it's possible to have a high ROI in certain instances, but CAC also starts to go up because as you focus more and more on efficiency, you often stop doing the things that are driving a lot of effectiveness. I'll give you an example here. Let's imagine that you're the CEO of a company, let's say you're 50 million ARR or 40 million ARR, and you are looking to increase the efficiency of all of your departments, and you look at customer service and you say, we're spending a lot of money here. Like I think we have, let's say our revenue per head there is higher than you would like it. And your customer service is from your perspective bloated. Now, let's say you cut your customer service team by a significant percent. What will happen is your ROI will go up quite significantly, right? But if you are a very technical product and your customer service team is handling a lot of inquiries and customer complaints or questions, and it's running very effectively, but you cut the headcount of that team, what you'll see initially is a really good ROI on that, right? Everyone would be happy, the board would be happy with you. But what happens is that your number of customers who have complaints or questions, et cetera, didn't go down. It's just that now your customer service team is more strapped. Wait times are going to increase. The customer engagement quality is going to go way down. That will then translate into negative word of mouth, less referrals, and ultimately your brand reputation will go down. And because brand is largely a function of reputation, the value to the bottom line, because brand is an intangible asset, the value to the bottom line ultimately starts to decline. The problem with ROI is twofold here. One, it's just measuring straight up efficiency and not the effectiveness of that department. But two, there's no way to put what just happened in a spreadsheet and measure it, right? Because this is a symbiotic cascading relationship between all of these different things. All of these variables interplay with one another. And if you're just focusing on ROI, it's going to lead you to do stuff that's way less effective, which ultimately leads, ironically, to a negative impact on the bottom line. And so in this regard, when we're thinking about a situation where CAC is starting to go up and we're looking at all of the different things that we're doing, again, effectiveness overall is often a culprit here. And so the piece that I really wanted to focus on here is that in most cases, or I should say in a lot of cases, what happens when CAC starts going up is that you are exhausting the percentage of in-market buyers that you are targeting. So here's what tends to happen, right? When you're a startup, let's just say like a SaaS startup or any startup in B2B or B2C, you have a product. As long as there is demand for your product and you are differentiated, you can have an outsized share of voice somewhere, you have decent targeting positioning, you can get sales and revenue by focusing purely on in-market buyers. And in fact, you can grow pretty significantly ARR-wise with focusing only on in-market buyers, right? Whether that's Google Ads, direct response on platforms like Meta that are really good at driving in-market purchasers, outbound sales, so on and so forth. That engine can get you to significant, double-digit ARRs, absolutely. But what often happens here is that, and marketers call this the performance plateau in a lot of cases, and Preston's published a lot of really, really great work here. But what will happen is your sales and revenue and profit will be up and to the right until the pool of in-market buyers that you are targeting ultimately becomes saturated, and you continue to spend only on those in-market buyers. And eventually what happens is you reach a ceiling where CAC is continuing to go up, and nothing that you do in the platform, let's say you've audited the platforms, you have someone skilled, you've gone through, you have FU analytics, you're really optimizing everything you can, but CAC still isn't going down. It's quite possibly because you are not targeting any out-of-market buyers. And so now we're getting into again, this issue of effectiveness and how in a lot of cases an efficiency metric doing poorly is because we're doing ineffective things. And so regardless of your market, B2B, B2C, you have a percentage that is in market and you have a percentage that is out of market. And B2B, it tends to favor out of market buyers quite significantly. And then B2C, it's way higher, the percentage who are in market, simply because of the interpurchase period. So how often do you buy toothpaste? Once a month, right? How often do you get a haircut? Maybe once a month, once every 2 months. Depends on your hair genetics and style and all those things. But the point is, you're probably getting a haircut somewhere between once every 3 weeks and once every 3 months. Same thing with toothpaste, same thing with the pound of your favorite coffee that you brew at home. In B2B, of course, that interpurchase period is way longer. So for something like a CRM, I think it's like every 3 or 4 years on average, companies switch CRMs or buy computers for their employees or change their payroll or HR software. So the interpurchase period is vastly higher in B2B, which just directly translates to a smaller percentage of your market who's in market at any given time. This is the 95-5 rule. It's been beaten to death on LinkedIn. But the implications for this are that in a lot of cases, you can, like I said, you can scale to double-digit ARR numbers by focusing only on those in-market buyers. But what happens is, as you saturate that pool of buyers, everyone who starts coming into market or everyone moving into market at any given point isn't thinking of you because you haven't done much to actually create memories for future buyers, which ultimately mental availability is half of the growth equation, physical availability being the other side of it. And so here's the other way to think about this. If you're familiar with mental and physical availability, CAC going up in a lot of cases is actually because what you're doing is you've exhausted physical availability's impact based on your current targeting and positioning. So what I mean by that is you've essentially tapped out on the number of people who are in market looking for you. And now what you need to do is you need to continue to focus on in-market buyers, but now you do need to start reaching out-of-market buyers who are in your target market still. So let's say, for example, again, you are a startup, or maybe you're at 30, 40 million, or even like 15, 20 million, and you have a target segment who is, let's say, like this band of, maybe you're in B2B and you have a band of companies who are in a specific revenue range in this industry, so on and so forth. And you've grown up to where you are by just targeting in-market buyers and outbound, and that engine is running quite efficiently, and then CAC starts to go up. This is now the point where you want to begin shifting the percentage of your budget that you have to, or from, in-market buyers. You want to slowly begin transitioning some of that budget over to out-of-market buyers. And the way that you should do this is not by just thinking of it as general brand awareness. That would be a bad decision, but thinking about this as creating mental availability with communications, both paid and organic, with those out-of-market buyers. And there's a pretty decent amount of data to show that when you do this, your short-term efficiency, direct response type marketing performs better when you are coupling it with mental availability building. The point there is when you combine the essentially what I would just call mental availability and physical availability tactical execution, the capturing of demand, the physical availability, all these terms basically in a lot of cases mean the same thing. But that side of the house, like the capturing demand, physical availability, direct response, those tactics work better when they're combined with the mental availability tactics, because just like we all know, if you go to Google and you search for something, you tend to click the result from the brand that you already know, even if it's unconscious. And so this is where things get interesting and nuanced, but we're going to stay relatively high level here and just continue to drill down on the point here, which is that as CAC goes up, you want to start shifting some of your budget to out-of-market buyers. And I do want to briefly touch on how to communicate this to the CFO. Whether you're a marketing leader or a CFO, a finance leader listening to this, this is going to be helpful for you, because the problem with this is that direct response, money in, money out, that is really easy to communicate, right? But when CAC starts to go up and you're continuing trying to get more and more efficient on these platforms and it's not working, you need to understand that the reason probably that that's not working is because you haven't built brand. Now, brand campaigns are not necessary to build brand, and there's a lot of confusion about what brand is and isn't. But basically, brand is reputation, and brand is a memory with financial value, right? It's John James quote, and it's my favorite way to think about it. And if you've only done like direct response, physical availability, like let's just sell to people who are in market, you probably haven't done as good of a job as creating those memories as communications that are designed specifically for creating mental availability. And you can do both, but that's the point here. And so when CAC starts to go up and you want to fix it, it is important to understand that now you have to start shifting some of that budget to start reaching out of market buyers. And this is so important is because as CAC goes up, if you've only been spending on in-market buyers, you need to be reaching out of market buyers who actually don't know you exist, because the pool of people who is in market is very, very small at any given time. And when you tap that out, you need to reach people. This is absolutely essential. You must be reaching more and more of your category to grow. This is non-negotiable. Growing through retention and expansion is vastly less effective than growing with new customer acquisition. You're going to hear things to the contrary, but in a lot of those cases, the good sources are actually not even cited. The point is you must reach more and more of your category to grow. And when you hit this problem, this performance plateau where CAC starts going up and you don't know why and you've done everything, but it's not working, this now is when you need to start shifting some of that budget over to out-of-market buyers who do not know who you are, so that when they come in market later, they think of you and they bypass Google and they buy from you, right? That's the essence of building mental availability. Now, I want to talk about the finance side of this because it's really crucial. So I've seen some pretty wild takes on LinkedIn from people who I respect, but I won't name. For example, you can't use ROI and basically like marketing should just be held accountable to only whether your business is going in the right direction, but that's basically it, right? Like you don't need to get more specific than that. And while I agree to that in part, if you go to your CFO with ROI is dumb, just like trust me, we need to spend more on so-called brand building, and then it doesn't work 3 months later, or you don't know how to communicate that or measure it, like you're going to get fired. So here's how I think the best way to think about this is, and these are not my ideas, like Dale Harrison has talked about this, Grace Kite has talked about this. There's a lot of people sharing this information, but really this is where basic financial acumen comes in, and I'm by no means an expert at all, but I've found that a tiny little bit of basic financial acumen really can help you as a marketer. So the way that I would categorize this is that most marketing spend, specifically like mental availability building communications, both on the paid and organic side, and I don't think of it as long-term brand and short-term performance. I just think of it as mental availability and physical availability. And I think advertising should always sell. It just whether or not it's going to sell right now or sell later. The distinction that matters is between targeting only in-market buyers and targeting out-of-market buyers. That's the really, really, really important distinction, because you can't force someone in market. So the way that I would think about this is that most marketing, specifically the mental availability building marketing, should be thought of as a capital expense and not an operational expense. Shorthand, you'll see this as Cap.Ex and OpEx. So this is for the marketers listening to this, right? Accounting departments, or if they're a big enough company that you have accounting split out from finance, are going to classify expenses as CapEx or OpEx typically. And so capital expense is seen as an investment where the spend in period drives a return later. In other words, out of period. So let's say we spend $10,000 on something in this month. A capital expense is an expense that is going to have a payback and return out of that month. An operational expense is seen as things that are not an investment, but are essential to keep the business running. So think about like salaries, for example, right? Or operational expense, or like office leasing, things like that. They don't provide a return in the future, but they're essential to keep the business running, and they're measured on return or the value being paid back in the period. So Grace Kite has a really good resource on this on LinkedIn, but what she calls out is that the kind of short-term direct response marketing that's easily measured on ROI is actually really good to be thought of or slotted in as an OpEx, not a CAP.Ex, because you're spending money in period and you're getting a return in period, and it's likely to pay off in the same period. And you should think of this, whether you're B2B or B2C, think of the periods, the periods are going to be a little longer with B2B and sales cycles, but the point is, like, I spend money in this quarter and I get whatever return, whether that's quality leads or opportunities, pipeline, etc. Then the other side of it, the mental availability building marketing communications, really should be thought of as a capital expense. And the reason is because you're investing in the future. So if I spend, let's say, 50% of my budget in a quarter on out-of-market future buyers, whether it's B2B or B2C, that spend should be thought of as a capital expense, because what I'm doing is I'm investing that spend now in a return that is going to pay back, not in period, but it's still going to pay back. And depending on whether it's B2B or B2C in the inter-purchase period, you can project, or at least I think predictions are challenging, right? But you can do some forecasting to help understand with your finance team, this spend is going to pay back over this period, and it's a non-linear return. Okay, but it is going to pay back. We don't just spend it and not get it, but it's going to pay back in the form of pricing power, in the form of lower CAC, right? Because that's what we're here to talk about. We're going to pay back in the form of lower CAC, faster sales cycles, bigger ACVs, all of these things. It is going to pay back the value. It just won't be done in a direct linear way that can be measured with ROI, which is where there's another really important distinction here to be made between, and there's different terminology here, but essentially direct or indirect returns, or tangible and intangible returns. So ROI is a metric that is a financial metric only, that tells you what the tangible return is on an asset. And this is really, really crucial, right? Like, if I invest in mutual funds, I can measure that with ROI, because it's literally just going to go up or down. The measurement is a tangible return. It's tangible. I can just see I put in $50 and it increased this much in value. When we're thinking about marketing, and most marketing spend, especially mental availability building spend, right, reaching out to market buyers, that spend is measured and should be measured on as an intangible return and not a tangible return. And there's a lot of examples of things that have intangible returns. When you think about an office building or a factory for a second. Like, a factory, if you're a GDC company, your factory can't be measured with ROI. In fact, if you tried to measure your factory with a tangible return metric like ROI, in that way, you wouldn't be able to show any ROI. In fact, it would show a negative ROI. And this is, again, Dale Harrison's example that I'm borrowing from him, but it's a really great example to just show this point, right? Your factory would show a negative ROI because we spend this much on the factory. How much money did the factory produce? Nothing. Okay, but the huge problem is that the factory is the reason that you're able to produce products and ship them to customers, and your business would absolutely fall apart in like 5 minutes if you didn't have the factory, right? It's just that it's not an asset that can be measured with a tangible return. It's measured with an intangible return. And the value is absolutely astronomical. It just can't be measured with ROI. And so when you are talking to your CFO, and like I said, you might be a CFO listening to this as well, and I hope that this makes sense to you. You might disagree a little bit, but I hope that I'm at least talking finance here, and this is the kind of the simple acumen that marketers should be able to have, that when you're spending on this kind of marketing communications, you need to understand that it is going to pay back, but it's measured as, or it's classified It's a capital expense with an intangible return. That's just super, super important. And so the payback occurs in lots of different ways, but we still do measure it. And again, because we're talking about CAC here, as you start shifting a little bit of budget over to out of market buyers who don't know who you are, right, and reaching more of your category, one of the ways that you can measure that then is what you will see is a better results with your efficiency metrics, CAC being one of them, right? So you will see that CAC actually starts going down as long as you're being effective and targeting the right people. You will start seeing CAC go down. You'll also see other metrics, again, like ACVs and sales cycles. So sales cycles will start to shrink. Your outbound performance will work better because outbound works better from people who already know who you are. And so the point is, you're going to see these metrics start looking better and better. It's just that you aren't measuring this as if that out of market marketing spend, the mental availability building spend, is measurable as a direct or tangible return. It is measured as if it is classified again as an intangible return. It's just very, very important because that's the type of asset class that marketing is. So again, the final thing that I just want to double stamp here is that in a lot of cases, as CAC is going up, I've actually seen in the past where ROAS is high, but CAC is going up. And you might say, well, how does that make any sense? And the issue there, again, is with incrementality. So one of the best ways to get a really good ROAS is by spending more money on remarketing. But the problem is a lot of those people who you are remarketing to would have bought at some point in the future anyway. Now, you can't know how many that would be. And there are, I'm a fan of like econometric modeling for companies at a certain stage of ARR, but you can't know for sure what that's going to be. But the point is that a lot of that spend is not incremental, right? And so you're basically, when you're spending money with remarketing, you're spending money to advertise to someone who potentially probably would have bought from you in the future anyway. And so what you're doing is your spend is less and less incremental. But ROAS looks really good because those people would have bought anyway. And so you're just targeting people who are who already know you and who are probably in market. And so your ROAS looks really good, but the incremental return is way lower, and CAC actually starts to go up, but your ROAS looks really good. And so there's a lot of cases where ROAS is high, but the business is suffering. And the reason for that, again, is what we just said in terms of incrementality. And you're actually not reaching any net new buyers, but also because of everything that we've set up to this point in terms of effectiveness and efficiency, and then also the issue of reaching real human beings on platforms. So again, just a reminder that ROI is really important. It matters. But if you focus only on the efficiency side of the house, you can run a business into the ground this way. And I've seen sad things in this regard by focusing so much on efficiency that the business starts to suffer, right? Because efficiency has nothing to do with effectiveness. And what I mean by that is just because something is efficient, it doesn't mean that it's effective. That's what I mean. There is a relationship because as you're more effective, you tend to be more efficient, right? But just because you're efficient has nothing to do with whether or not you're being effective or not. And that's why effectiveness must come first and efficiency must come second. Because if I'm reaching 90% bots and not human beings, but I'm getting a 5-cent cost per click, who the F cares, right? This is the point of this. So we've covered decent ground in this episode, and I'll just do a super quick recap for those of you listening or watching. So when CAC starts to go up, it often, not always, but often is because you are being ineffective somewhere. And so you need to diagnose first. That means looking at your platforms, making sure you're reaching human beings. It also means looking at your targeting, making sure that there's a congruence between your targeting, your spot in the market, and your positioning. So there's a strategic conversation that should be happening there. So you want to audit the platforms. You want to make sure you're reaching human beings, audit your targeting, and audit your positioning. Then you also want to be looking at the ratio of your spend on mental availability versus physical availability. In other words, out of market future buyers versus only in market buyers, because in a lot of cases, CAC is going up because you are saturating the number of in market buyers you are reaching. So that's the other place you want to look. And then finally, you want to be in a position as a marketer or a finance leader where you can work together to classify marketing expenses correctly as either OpEx or CapEx based on what they are, and also understand that there's a difference between tangible and intangible returns and the place that ROI fits into all of this, because again, you can focus only on ROI so much that you run a business into the ground. Not that it doesn't matter, it has a place, it's important, but just to be very clear about that. With that, we've reached the end here. If this was helpful, please share this. It really, really helps me a ton. So if this was helpful at all, please do give this a share. That's my one ask to you. If you want to come on and be a guest, just DM me on LinkedIn. I love talking to awesome people. Also, please do rate this on either Apple or Spotify. I would really, really appreciate that too, and give it a follow. With that, thank you very much for listening. And until next time, all the best to you.